through this, no guarantees. So thank you again to everybody who came from far and near on a work night to join with us in celebrating Rachel's bat mitzvah. Before we begin and talk about Rachel, there is something, or rather someone, I want to talk about. Over the course of a number of years, it has been made clear that there is a certain individual about whom I am not to speak publicly at events such as these. It may not have been an explicit directive, but it was certainly sufficiently implicit. While the directive has been honored until now, it has become increasingly clear that to continue to do so would be the equivalent of inviting your nearest and dearest to the dedication of a beautiful new building, while never mentioning its chief architect and builder, who lovingly labored, sometimes night and day, to see it through to its opening. With that in mind, I feel compelled to acknowledge this person. Although in attempting to walk the line and honoring their wishes, I will not mention them by name. A funny thing happens when you begin to get ready for a life event involving your child, such as a bar or bat mitzvah. You become aware of the transition that is about to happen from childhood to adulthood, and you feel compelled to prepare. You work to identify what you could possibly give to the child, to be able to chanoch lanar al pi darko, to find something that will help him or her as they make the transition to adulthood, no matter the degree to which they themselves might be aware of the change that is coming. What inevitably follows is that the focus on the child increases, and you look from afar to see what you might see and how you might bring to the forefront the light of that child and identify some wisdom that might help the child transition into adulthood, positioned to make their light shine brighter and brighter for all the world to see. The remainder of what I want to talk about today really is all connected to that process. Once you've gone through the process more than once, you start to see patterns. By now, having gone through the process once before with Tali and now Rachel, I can clearly see a specific pattern. And although the pattern was apparent to me before, the formality of the process makes it all the clearer now, and I can more easily trace it to its source. Where once I was blind, now I can see. Let me explain. The song Eshet Chayo is filled with deep wisdom that could easily fill whole libraries. Although it is 150 words long, I'm going to focus today on only 3. The words Kamu Vanea Vayashruha are most often translated as her children rise up and praise her. On its most basic level, we can understand this to mean that once they mature and recognize the sacrifice, wisdom, and care that their mother invested in raising them, they will stand and praise her. But there is a deeper meaning to the 3 words. In reality, Kamu Vaneha Vayashrua is not a predictive statement, it's a system statement. Kamu Vaneha Vayashrua is not telling us that her children will physically rise up and praise her. It's telling us how the system works. What Kamu Vaneha Vayashrua tells us is if you peer into the well-being of a child, his or her mother will peer back at you. You can imagine, therefore, having gone through the process of peering into our children twice now, to the degree that any person can possibly do so externally, and recognizing the deep health and well-being that is evident there, you can imagine the gratitude with which I enter today. You can understand that having gone through the process of Kamu Vanea Vayashruha, that inevitably what must follow is Bahala Vayahalala, her husband, he does praise her. And you can see why I was left with no choice but to begin today in this manner. And now, before I get into any more trouble than I'm already in, let's talk about the guest of honor. How do we talk about Rachel? We know we have our own thoughts and observations that we could start with, but the researcher in me wants objective data and an unbiased view. So we turn to the individuals who spend more waking hours with her than anyone, including her own family, and who offer a measure of objectivity that perhaps family cannot have. I looked through all of Rachel's anecdotals from school going back to kindergarten. The anecdotal is a lengthy report in which the teacher describes the student's progress during the year and includes observations about her personality. The authors differ from one year to the next, but the adjectives do not. Happy, smiling, laughing, giggle, joy, etc., etc. It has been said that the more intimate a culture is with a particular phenomenon, the more the language allows to describe it. For example, anthropologist Franz Boas famously describes indigenous Eskimos as possessing more than 300 words to describe snow and ice. The Hebrew language has many words to describe joy. Gila, Rina, Ditza, Bechad, Va'ava, V'yaakov, V'shalom, V'reu. We all know these as but a few. Yet we also know that even as our people possess numerous ways to describe distinct and unique experiences of joy, the pain of our galut is such that although we do experience flashes of joy and happiness, true sustained joy is reserved for the end of our long exile. Shir Hamalach Beshuv Hashem et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kechomim. When God returns his people to the promised land, we will be like having been woken from a dream. Az Yimale Tzchok Pinu Shonenu Rina. Then, it is at this point, at the end of the galut, our mouths will be filled with laughter and our tongues with joy. So we know that it is only at the end of our galut that our joy and our laughter will return in a permanent way. And yet we know that joy and laughter is the default state in which Rachel's teachers describe her year after year, and our own observations regarding the joy Rachel brings to our household tell us we are in the presence of something that seems to have a certain degree of permanence, despite it's not supposed to be possible at this time. What are we to make of this seeming contradiction? In thinking about this and in thinking about our Rachel and her joy and her happiness, we feel that there is sufficient evidence to infer that although it is clear that true permanent joy for all Jews is reserved for the end of Galut, it is also clear that there are certain hints and helpers that are placed in the pre-end of Galut world, so that we can be reminded of what the end of Galut is meant to be, so that we can orient ourselves appropriately, so that we can get a taste of the joy and happiness that awaits us. These hints are designed, perhaps, to give us hope, to encourage us to focus on the end point, and to help us maintain a picture in our minds of where we are headed, no matter what the most recent news headlines might say. This is our Rachel. When we integrate this and we really stop and think about it, if we believe it to be true, as Eliza and I do, if we believe it to be an accurate explanation of what's occurring, we are struck with two distinct thoughts. The first is we can't help but be profoundly humbled that this opportunity, this glimpse into our nation's future be offered to us. We cannot escape the recognition that there is nothing we could begin to talk about that could be adequate to have earned such a thing, and we are profoundly humbled. The second is remembering the words of the Chachamim, who clearly tell us that in keeping with the principles of free will and choice, each individual, each soul makes their own pre-birth choice as to the family he or she will join on earth. There's agreement beforehand. These are the parents I will be born to. When we think about this, we have a profound sense of gratitude to you, Rachel, that at some point in time, you specifically and volitionally agreed to join our little family and to bring your joy and happiness into our little community. So now, having arrived at these conclusions, we return where we began. Knowing what we now know, what is the wisdom we can find to offer support in a transitional process to adulthood? What can we offer to Rachel to support her as she becomes an adult? This question, while seemingly straightforward, actually presented a significant problem. While I have no illusions of any individual's perfection, what lasting piece of wisdom do you offer a person already possessed of the knowledge of how to live in joy? Someone who lives in joy, by definition, can only exist in that state already saying, I have absolutely everything that I need. Shouldn't she be teaching me, not the other way around? This problem persisted for several weeks as false start after false start occurred. They went something like this. I think you should, you oughta, what you should do is. This went on until finally the solution presented itself. The answer, it turned out, Rachel, came from your Bat Mitzvah Parshat Bamidbar. The Parsha begins by directing Moshe to count the Bnei Israel. After describing the process to do so, and in naming the Nasi of every tribe, the Torah explains that Moshe should not count the tribe of Levi, that their work was with the Mishkan. The Pasuk explains that they will carry the Mishkan and its vessels, and closes with, V'saviv la-Mishkan yachanu, and around the Mishkan shall they camp. Here we find the answer to our dilemma. We know that so much of the Torah is allegory and is designed to teach us something deeper that is directly applicable to our lives, rather than the simple relating of events. What really is the Mishkan? We know that the Chachamim tell us that the Beit HaMikdash was designed in the shape of the human. We know too that the Mishkan is the resting place of the Shekhinah, and that each of us has a piece of the Shekhinah in us. So when the Leviim are directed to camp facing the Mishkan, what the Torah is telling us is that we are all directed to face our inner selves. Turn to face the very central part of the human, the inner self, the place that houses the Chelek Elokam Imal, the piece of the divine from on high that lives in each of us. Turn to face it, we are encouraged, so that you can develop a sense of awareness and ensure that your attention is tuned to it, so that you can always keep an eye on it. This is confirmation of the value of the human soul, the confirmation of its existence, and a description with which we should safeguard the depths of holiness with which we have been gifted. The Torah goes on to say, "Uvinsoa hamishkan yuridu oto halaviyim, uvechanot hamishkan yakimu oto halaviyim, vehazar hakarov yumat." When the Mishkan travels, the Leviim shall take it down, and when the Mishkan camps, the Leviim should put it up, and the stranger who comes close shall be put to death. Here the Torah gives us further insight into how to protect our inner selves. First, we are reminded that there will be times when the Mishkan will be taken down, that our inner selves will not be visible, that when we are in the act of traveling, the inner self will not be visible. When we travel to a new place, as we evolve as humans, we may go through periods where the inner self is not visible. But when we arrive there in that place, we will be rebuilt, and our inner selves will become visible again. This is a normal part of the process, we are told, and we need not worry about the normal ebb and flow. Yet our facing the Mishkan must be ever present. Our careful attention and focus on the inner self may identify instances that are outside the norm of the regular ebb and flow, and these are the instances when action is warranted. This is the occurrence the Torah describes, Rachel, with the phrase "V'hazar hakarov yumat," and the stranger who comes close shall be put to death. The word zar is normally translated as any non-Levi. In other words, a Yisrael who approaches and enters the Mishkan is to be put to death. But why state it in such a roundabout way, a stranger? Why not say just what you mean? A Yisrael who successfully enters is to be put to death. The language v'hazar and the stranger seems to suggest there is something very specific, a specific entity in mind. And the language yumat implies that there is an active action of some kind that must be taken in this instance. Perhaps what the Torah had in mind is when something foreign approaches the Mishkan, the inner self, it must be prevented from entering. What is to be considered foreign? Anything that threatens the Chelek Elokam Imal, the peace of the divine from on high. Anything that will dim our light. Any person, place, or thing that is against our innermost nature and will prevent the Chelek Elokam Imal from being visible. It must be figuratively hunted down and killed. It cannot be allowed to enter the camp. But what is a kind, gentle person such as Rachel, who cries when seeing a hurt animal, who barely has an aggressive cell in her body? What is she to do with the directive to figuratively murder a strange entity that approaches the camp? While it all sounds good in practice, what is one to do if it literally defies one's very nature? The answer is, first we must know that the phrase yumat, put to death, must be understood in its proper context. When we think about death in the context of how it relates specifically to me, the end result of death is that that entity, that person, place, or thing is no longer around me. So it is not really about putting something to death in a violent context of how we might normally think of that phrase. It is about making it dead to you, which means taking steps to ensure it is no longer around you. Yet even with that approach, there may very well be times where an action we might think about as not nice or mean is required in order to create separation from the thing which threatens your God-given joy. Here we are reminded of the encouragement to be godlike, to mimic his attributes in our day-to-day life. Hashem is described as Ish Milchama, the man of war. This is one of the ways he is described, and it suggests that there are times we must engage our inner warrior, Rachel. It suggests that there is a time and a place for each of the attributes, mercy, and kindness, and yes, even a warrior. Do not say, how can I be a warrior against someone? How can I act in a way that requires me to protect myself? It is mean and unkind. The Torah here is speaking to you and telling you, engage your warrior, protect the gift you have been given. Watch over your chelek elokam imal. Take whatever steps you must to ensure that your joy is protected and preserved. For I had you and your joy in mind when I placed it in you. Look at the statement, Hashem ish milchama, Hashem shemo, and know that you can engage your warrior to protect your inner self, and know that the purpose is for good, both in the beginning and the end, because the ish milchama is surrounded by the yud ke vav ke. It is surrounded by the midat harachamim. And we can know that you have the permission of none other than God Himself to be a warrior, to protect your chelek elokam imal. Know that the statement Me'azar HaKarev Yumat implies that intentional action will be necessary on your part. That you may be called to do what you are not immediately comfortable doing, but that action on your part will be necessary to preserve and protect your chelek elokam imal. How will you know when such an instance is occurring? The very presence of the directive to turn and face the inner Mishkan and to be vigilant about ensuring that no stranger enter tells us that if we maintain our vigilance in facing the Mishkan, we will know when a stranger approaches. Don't wait for the foreign object to penetrate the walls of the camp. Keep your vigilance. Do what may not come naturally to you and act against it with all the might you possess before it breaches the walls, so that the joy never leave your heart. The smile never leave your face. So putting it all together, where does that leave us, Rachel? It leaves us with all of us here today, collectively sending you on your way into adulthood, armed with the knowledge and understanding that to each of us, you are a gift from on high, that your joy brightens our lives, that we encourage you to be vigilant in protecting it, that we as a community remind you you have the permission from no less than the creator of the world himself, to be a warrior in protecting your chelek elokam imal. Mazel tov, Rachel. Mommy and I are so proud of you, and we love you forever. We're going to set up the montage in a couple minutes, so hang tight.